So yes, thank you, Mike, for coming on. We have the piano legend, rock and roll piano man, Mike Garson. Obviously, you and I have chatted before. But for people listening to this, for people who don't know you, they're about to get to know you because you got stories, Mike. You are the longest running and most frequent band member for David Bowie, and you've also played with your friend Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins. We'll talk about him and Nine Inch Nails and St. Vincent and Duran Duran and so many other legends, but you're obviously a legend unto yourself, and I always really enjoy chatting with you. So thank you for logging on today.
I think it's an interesting part of my life because nothing has shifted in terms of my joy for playing the piano, and I think that's really the key. When the passion sort of evaporates, you probably heard this from a million artists that you've interviewed. The game is over.
Yeah, well, the
You
joy.
could phone, yeah, you could phone it in, but nothing's gonna supplant loving what you're doing. There have been times even 50 years ago when I got bored playing, so I stopped, but it never lasted more than a day or two. I
I'm
thought that
so
was a long time, you know.
I'm so glad about that. And yeah, the joy hasn't shifted for me for talking with you. The first time I talked with you was when you did this David Bowie live stream during like the height of the pandemic.
I remember.
And I always derive great joy from seeing you live, often at the Sunrose, where you were kind of the artist in residence there, the Sunrose on the Sunset Strip. So yeah, I mean, I'll talk to you anytime. The reason I'm talking to you right now is you have this big residency, Bowie's Piano Man, A Decade in the Stars. It's coming up this month, January 8th through 10th at the Sunrose. And it's kind of crazy to me to realize that this coincides with the what would have been the 79th birthday for David Bowie and the 10th anniversary of Black Star, but also the 10th anniversary, sadly, of his passing. I can't believe, like, that's why I guess it's called A Decade of the Star. I can't believe it's been a decade, like, since David Bowie left us, because I feel like
Yeah.
he never left us, right?
Everybody that I have spoken to, the first thing they say is it really 10 years. I was talking with Evan Rachel Wood. She said it, Billy Corgan didn't believe it. And it's hard to believe because January 8th is Thursday night, and that is his birthday.
Mm-hmm.
January 10th is when he passed.
Yes. And I still remember it. I mean, everyone remembers it. I'm sure you remember it very well because January 8th, on his birthday, his 69th birthday, was when he put out Black Star, and everybody was raving about it because it was one of the best albums of his career. Certainly one of the best albums he'd done in a long time. And he hadn't, he'd taken that really long break before he came back with the next day. So everyone was very excited. That whole weekend, people were talking about Black Star. And then on Sunday night, we got this horrible, unexpected, crazy news that a guy who seemed to be making, not, I'm sorry, we're going to start off a bummer, but we have to talk, like a guy who everyone kind of thought was making a comeback. People were like, oh, is David Bowie going to play Coachella or, tour again, and then he left us with that beautiful parting gift. And, his legacy and the tributes to him have rolled in the 10 years since, and you've spearheaded a lot of the great ones, and so yeah, it's going to be a pretty, I imagine, emotional 3 nights for you and your special guests when you are at the Sunrose next week.
Yeah, I mean, it was only weeks to a month or two that he reached out to me before he passed, talking about doing continuing the trilogy of the Outside album.
Oh wow, please tell me about this. I know a little bit about this, but I don't know the details of the conversations or so.
Everybody who was close to him, Tony Visconti, mainly, and but others have their own angle with it. But we had a very special connection because I was only hired for 8 weeks, and I end up doing 400 shows with him and over 20 albums. They're still putting them out.
Yeah, I know.
so, so the whole thing is bizarre in that I didn't even know who he was when I joined the band. So it's somewhat of an example of getting out of your own way
Mm-hmm.
because you plan all sorts of things and some things happen, some don't, some happen well, some happen not so well. And then you don't plan anything and all of a sudden magic happens. I'm thinking all my best gigs with Smashing Pumpkins, Freddie Hubbard, Elvin Jones, Stan Getz, Chick Corea, um, Joe Elliott, what's that band?
Def Leppard, Def
Def
Leppard.
Leppard, I'm on their album.
Joe Elliott is like one of the biggest Bowie vets you'll meet, and that's a pretty major thing to say because everyone's a Bowie fan. But yeah, he's
I mean, he's ridiculous, and so, you know, I'm just thinking about every great gig, jazz, classical, rock, pop, fusion, they happen when I shut the fuck up and got out of my own way. That's the
well, I
best way. That's the best way I could put it.
we've talked, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again. You and I, in previous interviews, have talked about, as you mentioned, you didn't know who Bowie was. It's kind of this random thing that this Catskills jazz guy ended up in the Spiders for Bars, and you were there at that final Spiders for Bars show. You were like the one, person from that band that continued on into the next era, as we now call them. But this whole outside, so as we've said, David Bowie died in 2016, beginning of 2016. There's this running joke. I mean, that the world kind of went to hell when David Bowie left us because it's
Yeah.
been a crazy 10 years in so many other ways. But you said you spoke to him shortly before that. When was the last time you spoke with him? And you talked about working together, or what's the story there?
Yeah, like I say, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks before he passed,
Oh
he
wow.
see the Outside album is a fantastic album, one of my most enjoyable because it was all improvised. And
Mm-hmm.
then him and Brian Eno put the music together, but it came from a very natural state, it just emerged as opposed to worked out. And he had told me at the time he's choosing the people who were the biggest influence in his life. So it was me and Brian Eno and Reeves Gabrels and Sterling Campbell and Carlos Alomar, and we all sort of met there. Also, a great bass player and musician named Erdl. So we show up there, and he said this is going to be part of a trilogy, and we'll be doing over the next few years 3 albums of the Outside. So we did the first one, and some person stole the tapes and they released all the other material but unfinished online.
Oh man.
And that took the life out of David. So we never, he said, fuck it, I'm done with it. But then a few months or less before he died, there was enough, 20 years had passed, and he thought, okay, we can do this. So he never gave up hope, I guess is what I'm really saying here. He was dying, and yet he's saying, let's do this, with the hope there. People do have miracles with cancer, but he didn't. And, but he still said that. So, of course, I got excited. But really, what threw it off for me, and this is all appropriate because there's nothing to push with the Sunrose because it's sold out. Maybe there'll be a seat here or a seat there, and hopefully it'll show up where people need to see it, be it the internet or a film or Instagram. But it was like, oh, jeez, I lost my train of thought.
Well, you were talking about David Bowie, talking with him a few weeks before he passed, and he hadn't kind of lost hope or his fire. And I don't know if you even knew if he um no one, I don't think most people, I mean, the world did not know he was sick. Did you know he was sick when you spoke with him that time? Did he mention his health or anything?
No,
Okay.
No,
Wow.
he kept it quiet. I think um, here's what happened. At around that time, there was a biography coming out on my life by a gentleman from London who wrote the book. I'm blanking anyway. It was Bowie's Piano Man. It'll come back.
Mm-hmm. It's
Um,
available at Licorice Pizza Records
is it?
or
Is it?
mm-hmm. We have copies there for sale.
Anyway, um, what happened was I'm trying to get the sequence. I wrote him an email saying Cliff Slapper was the guy, and he said, "Listen to these 60 songs or 80 songs that you played with Bowie over the years, all at once. Nobody's ever asked me to do that." So I sat down for hours, listened to everything I ever played on with him, and I
Wow.
was awestruck. And instantly I wrote David, and he within 3 seconds emailed me back saying, "Mike, we did a great body of work together." And I got off the phone and I said to Susan, "That's the last time I'm going to hear from him."
That was an email or a call?
Email. I said, "This is the last time." I said to my wife, Susan, "This is the last time I'm going to hear from him," because he said it in a finality. We did a great body of work together.
Mm,
And I don't know if it was just an intuition he's dying, but I said to Susan, "That's the last time I'm going to speak to him." And I did not know he was dying then because he kept it secret from everyone.
yeah. Wow, I never knew that story before.
Yeah, there's always another one I, I
Yeah, I
remember.
mean, obviously I don't a lot of your memories are fun ones. They're not all sad ones, but yeah, I did not know. But that kind of makes sense looking back. I mean, you actually performed with David Bowie at what turned out to be his last musical performance ever in 2000, 20 years ago, in 2006. I love the story of that because I don't, he had already been off the scene for a little bit after the reality tour. I don't know if it was like, which I saw by the way, and it was amazing. But I don't know if when he did that show it was with Alicia Keys in 2006 and you were there, if it was like, did people know that was like, or did you know that that was, you know, the last time he'd be on stage singing or the last time you guys would share a stage together? Because you
Yeah,
were there at the beginning of his US rise with Ziggy, and then you were there for the last performance, which, was at, I think, was it, was it in America? I believe it
it
was.
was in New York as a benefit for Save the Children.
Just tell me about that night.
So it was David and myself and Alicia Keys, and we did changes.
Oh, wow.
And that was my audition song. So that's the bookends.
That's so I mean, wow. But did you know at the time you had this intuition with that email that there was this finality of what was going to
But
sadly happen?
that was 10 years later.
But 10 years earlier when you were on stage with him in New York, were you thinking that would be, and you were doing Changes, which is a song that lyrically takes on so much meaning as we all, go through life and go through changes. Like, did you know then that it was that might be, or that it was, okay, this is probably the last time he and I will play together, or uh did you have that kind of sixth sense then as well?
What I knew was he was testing out, can I go back on the road again?
Mm.
Because a few months before, he brought me in to do a show, just me and him in New York. I can't remember what it was. And he said, "The reason I'm doing this is to see if my strength is back and I can do it, and I could trust you to hold the fort down when you accompany me. And it's no band, it's just us." So he after we did that, he said, "Okay, I think I can do it." So this was a good thing. It was at Radio City Music Hall. It might have been a fashion show. I think we did Wild as the Wind or Life on Mars or something. And I was so excited um, that this was a possibility. But when we did the show with Alicia Keys, they had a film crew there. Nobody has ever seen that show. It was only a few songs, and Alicia had her band, and she was going to play changes. But when I came to New York, she said, I think you should play piano on this one. And I said, thanks. And I did. And she stood with him and sang. But he wouldn't let the film crew film it because he was still recuperating from his heart attack, and he was a little more overweight and swollen, which is common when you're healing from that. You're on steroids and different things. So he was self-conscious, and
Mm.
I thought that was a big mistake because it was an amazing performance. I didn't
So
think it was a big mistake from his viewpoint. From his viewpoint, I don't want to be videoed when I don't feel at my best, but his voice and his essence was as great as ever. Physically, maybe didn't look as good, but he still looked great. Bowie was so handsome. He looked great at any stage of his life. He looked great in the videos on Black Star, you
I
know.
know, right? I mean, that was, yeah, I
Yeah. So,
100% agree. Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that story either.
yeah, I mean, I probably have 10,000 stories and I never remember one of them until I'm prompted. I'm like AI, you ask the right question and and then
Well,
I can say something.
hopefully I'll keep asking the great prompts. So yeah, what's really fascinating, we're talking about a lot of like end things like David Bowie's last show, last album, the last communication you had with him. But you did mention changes, which takes us all the way back to the beginning, like you said, bookending things. And you and I've talked about it a little bit before, but I always hear something new when you and I chat. And for people listening who, don't know the story, it's a crazy story, as all your stories are. The audition process with changes, because as you've alluded to, this was not your world. Glam rock, even rock and roll in general, was not your world, and you thought it was going to be a temporary gig. So let's go all the way back to the beginning about how you ended up being on stage with Bowie for, yeah, like I said, being his longest running collaborator or band member for decades. It's a crazy story.
This really is. I was working in a jazz club a few days earlier, and I ended up playing with some musicians who were just fantastic, who had played with Miles Davis and this and that, just the top of the top. And I had been practicing 8 hours a day for years, going out and testing it out. And I show up at this gig, and there's 5 people in the club, and I make $5. So here I spend my life. I'm in my mid 20s, and I have already a family, and my daughter was 1 year old, I think, then. And I'm thinking, $5 a night. Okay, the rent in Brooklyn was $150. So 30 fucking gigs will get me $150. But what about the telephone? And what about the gas? I didn't have an electric car then. What about the gas? What about food? What about clothing? And I said, this can't be. These are the best players. Everyone sounded great, and no one is here. That is the story of jazz, except for, Miles Davis and Coltrane. But even then, those guys in the rough times, I'd go see the jazz pianist Bill Evans at the Village Vanguard and be 8 people, or my great teacher Lenny Tristano, who was a blind pianist who played with Charlie Parker. There'd be 10 people in a club. So that's the history of jazz. Some of my best jazz playing has been in a jazz club with 3 people. I don't care. I feel bad for the owners of the club, but the music is always great. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm walking home and I said, I actually think I need to go out with a rock band to make a living.
You
What's
could do
that?
that. You could do that then. Not as good a career choice now, maybe as back then, but yeah, you could make a good living playing rock and roll in 19 what was it? What year was this?
That would have been 72.
Okay. So how did
So,
you get the call from
well, what's that expression? Watch what you wish for.
be careful what you wish for?
So the next day, the phone rings and it's David Bowie. Go figure, right?
Did he like who tipped him off? Who said give this
He
dude a
got
call?
tipped off by a Annette Peacock, who was a very avant-garde singer that Leave It to Bowie and Mick Ronson, they knew her. And I had just played on her album.
Oh, okay.
So she said, he comes, look, he's out of his mind then. He comes to New York to do the Ziggy Stardust tours without a piano. How do you come without a pianist when you're going to do Changes and Life on Mars and all those great piano parts were done by Rick Wakeman? How does that happen? You know what I mean? So she said Mike is the person. He actually wanted her to play piano because she could play the piano much more limited than me, but she wouldn't have been right. But she had her own career going. It was very underground, but she was wild. The fact that Bowie looked up to her, you could even hear some things he has sung that remind me of her singing on a particular song called Something in the Air. And we did it in Paris in the late 90s. And I thought to myself, that sounds like Annette Peacock. So he was a chameleon and he was a sponge and he absorbed Annette as well as everybody else who he loved.
I gotta wonder, do you know if obviously it all worked out that you ended up in the band and we'll get to that, but do you know if there were ever times when Annette was like, damn, like, like I passed up an opportunity to be
Not at all. Not at all. Annette is Annette. She's like the real deal in terms of her integrity. She didn't want that. She just wanted to do her music. So I don't think she regretted it at all. In fact, I saw her a few times over the years. She lives upstate New York. She's actually older than I am, and I'm pretty old. And she said she came to a show and was just happy to see me. There was no jealousy at all. In fact, she probably was proud that she recommended me because it was life changing for me and
absolutely.
ultimately for David, right?
Well, because I mean, you guys really did seem like you were from, at least at the beginning, from other planets in terms of your backgrounds. You were this jazz guy, making ends meet, playing in the Catskills, playing weddings, bar mitzvahs, regular just gigging jazz guy. And here's David Bowie. Maybe he wasn't the David Bowie in America, at least that we all would come to realize was such
Yeah,
an icon,
yeah.
but he was this other whole other world. And yet obviously when you came together, it was a match made in the stars. So what was the audition process besides, like I, you must have walked into that scene and been like, what have I walked into?
Well, when I got the call, I was giving a piano lesson and my wife was working and I have a daughter that's 1 year old in a little swing next to the piano. And it's like, what do I do? They want me in RCA studios in New York City in 20 minutes and I'm in Brooklyn. What do I do? So I asked the piano student to babysit my daughter. To this day, my wife keeps talking about that.
I
Even
mean,
though
that could have gone wrong. Obviously,
that
it,
could have
it did
gone
go
wrong.
right.
They could
Obviously,
have,
in retrospect, it was a good decision, but at the time, yeah, it might have been a
yeah.
bit
So
sus.
I ran down there, and these guys, I'm in jeans, and these guys are all decked out in the middle of the week. They are decked out in all kinds of wild clothing. And I thought, where am I? And there's this handsome guy sitting at the piano, and it's Mick Ronson. And David's in the control room, and so is Woody, and so is Trevor. And those were the Spiders. And Mick shows me the music of Changes. He says, play this. So I did something like, he said, "You got the gig."
Literally?
Literally.
Did you know his music before? Like, did you?
I didn't know anything. I didn't know David Bowie. I didn't know his music. I never heard it. But I'm a good musician. I could read the music. But I made up my own immediately. I played it very different than Rick Wakeman, who played it more pop, very right, but just sort of, he played it straight. And I did all these flourishes because I knew that that's who I am. And David will either like it or not like it. And he liked it. And that was it. And I was hired for 8 weeks. And that was all it was supposed to be. That's why I said early on it was sort of meant to be because I ended up the longest standing member. It didn't make any sense to me because there were periods of time I wasn't with him.
Mm.
But what people don't know, you talk about a story that I never have shared much. Between 1972 and 1974, I did Aladdin Sane album, Diamond Dogs, Pinups, Young Americans. Uh, well, there was the whole Ziggy Stardust movie came out. There might
Hmm.
have been one other album. And in that period of time, you won't believe this, but he fired 5 bands, except
Full
for me.
five full bands.
5 full bands were each fired, starting with the Spiders from Mars.
Well, let's get into the spiders and how soon after this kind of kismet random audition uh did you go on tour with the spiders? Because the first leg in the US, I believe, began in like September of 72, and that was when you debuted with them live, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was October, maybe
Okay.
in Cleveland, but very close.
Was
So
that the one that Hall and Oates opened for? Because I've talked to Hall and Oates about that, which is a crazy story in its own right.
I don't know. You
They
might be
did,
right.
I'm pretty sure. But anyway, so yes, how back to my question. Um, you joined the band. How soon are you on the road with them? With the Spiders from Mars?
2 weeks less. I had to learn all that music and be on the road with them.
And did you what obviously they had to kit you up. They had to outfit you up to match all you talked about, jeans weren't going to work. So
Geez,
what
what they didn't put me over the top like them, but they put me in this extremely cool tuxedo with big boots. I remember being in a store picking out the boots, and I remember seeing Elton in the same store on Sunset Boulevard. So I knew, okay, different life, no jeans anymore, the big platform boots, and then some tuxedo that was very ornate with a big flower and a big wild shirt and with flourishes. And I had a good look. I wish I had that outfit. David kept everything. He was very amazing with his archives. Of course, if you go to London, you could see a lot of things at the museum that's just open that has 90,000 of his artifacts.
I got to ask you because I love the fashion stuff. Do you remember the store? It was on Sunset, which is where the Sunrose is, another for Sunset Boulevard, another full circle situation. What was the store? I, it's probably not around anymore, but if you remember, I would love to know
I wish I remembered.
because
It
I would.
was it was the store everyone went to in 1972.
I'll
We
look
could
it up.
probably find that. It had the coolest stuff. And I figured, well, when in Rome,
When in Hollywood.
when in
So,
Hollywood.
and then you went on the tour with, and that was when Bowie started. I know he'd had hits, or he'd had a hit with Space Oddity, and obviously he'd already exploded in the UK because of Starman on Top of the Pops, and every new wave star of the 80s, new romantic star of the 80s I've ever talked to, the guys at Duran Duran, the guys in Soft Cell, Boy George, list goes on, talk about that being, they all were around the telly and they saw that. So he had changed their lives. It kind of like put them on their path. So a lot of stuff was happening with Bowie. You join in the middle of this whirlwind. You come to the US. And then, I guess about a year, 9 months, 6 months later, the following year, and correct me if I've gotten any of the timeline wrong, but very famously, he kills off that Ziggy character on stage in London at Hammersmith Odeon, and that I assume means the whole band is gone except for you.
Exactly. And I knew that before, and that was
Oh,
painful.
well, tell me all about that because that's a legendary thing. And at that time, I imagine some people might have not really understood what Bowie's doing, thought maybe he was just retiring. You knew what was up. I don't know if the other band members knew what was up. And
The other band members didn't know. They were my friends. This was very uncomfortable for me.
how did you know about it? Did he take you aside
Yeah.
and did he explain what was like? What did he say?
Here's the bottom line. You could read it from 50 angles in 50 books, but the real truth took me a while to figure it out. He needed to move on and always did through his whole life. That's part of his structure. And just when the audience was ready for another year or two of the Spiders from Mars, he's done. That happened on the Diamond Dogs tour. That happened when he switched to Young Americans. That happened when he switched to Station. That happened when he did Scary Monsters and those albums. It happened when we did Outside, when we did Reality. Anytime he was getting comfortable, he was done.
Hmm.
Which is when most people settle in. He knew he had to, like I said early on, he knew he had to get out of his own way too and find the next thing. That's where his joy landed, which is exactly why he's the most influential rock musician of all time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because every actor I've met and every singer I've met all credit him as a gigantic influence. And then the ones who were too young to know, they'll say their influence was Trent Reznor, who was influenced by Bowie.
Yeah. It
So,
all kind of goes back to Bowie
yeah, I mean,
or the Beatles or Kraftwerk. I
well,
think it all kind of
yeah,
goes
I
back to
mean,
those
the
three.
Beatles, that's beyond obvious for everybody. For David, it was more specifically John Lennon. That was his biggest
Mm.
influence and
Yeah.
who he
Well,
loved the
yeah.
most.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. But yeah, so I still am very curious though. So how long before that final that iconic dramatic Hammersmith Odeon final Spiders from Mars show, like did you know that this was the final thing? Like what did Bowie say to you? Did he ask you to keep it a secret? Because yeah, that would be really tough, I imagine. Tough position for you to be in.
Very tough. I think it was about 24 hours, less maybe.
Oh my God. And what's your memory of that?
Basically, he's retiring this group and moving on. There looked like there were personal reasons for that, and may or may not have been, but I'm giving you the overarching reason is he just couldn't help himself. He had to keep changing. And I think the reason I stayed with him so long is I'm worse than him that way. I'll be working on a piano concerto, and the next week I'm in a jazz group. Then I'm playing a fusion band. Then I'm playing in a rock band, and
Which is
then
why, even though, sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say people might have thought you were from different planets, but when you word it like that, you guys were actually
we were
not
different planets, same solar system.
well put.
So we thought, or at least I thought, we were extremely different, as you say, but we might have been in our physical lifestyles, but not in our artistic thinking. I'm
Hmm.
actually more out there than him. Uh, but he had a commercial sense as well as an artistic sense. He had the balance of both.
Do you, just to put a bow on the whole spider story? So it's good that at least you didn't have to keep that secret weighing so heavily on you for too long. It was only a day, but after that shocking, it was shocking to the fans and I guess probably to your bandmates. Were they resentful of you of the fact that you knew that you stayed, or that you knew about it and knew that, when Ziggy dropped that bombshell on stage that you were gonna
It's
it would
human
be okay?
nature. It's human nature. I'm sure they was wondering why. But as I pointed out, and actually had nothing to do with friendship, although we were very good friends. It was I could switch. He wanted to. Next thing we did is went and did pinups,
Hmm.
and that's English rock standards from the '60s. And then soon thereafter, we're doing Diamond Dogs, and then I'm doing what is it?
Young
Young
American.
Americans. That's a different kind of playing than, or any of those things that I did early on. I was able to shift with him
Hmm.
like other musicians couldn't. All the musicians he ever had were great, really great, and he never chose a bad musician. But I happen to have a wider, I guess the best word is bandwidth. Band being the key word. No, but it was I just was in love with music. To this day, I I could go work with a hip hop band, you know, or Kendrick Lamar and find a place,
That
or
would
I
be
could
well,
work.
that would
Yeah,
be amazing. Kendrick, if you're listening to this, give Michael a call. He'll call up the babysitter and
yeah.
he'll come on over.
I would love that. I could play with Billie Eilish, but she's got that covered with her beautiful brother and all that. But I could do that. I could play for Sabrina Carpenter if I wanted. I could play for Taylor Swift if I wanted, especially if they wanted to do a imagining of their music. That's what I'm sort of good at.
Mm.
I could play. What else? Who else have I thought about recently? I could actually make music with Ed Sheeran.
I mean, you could pretty much make music with anyone. I certainly probably have my own wish list of things I'd like to see you do, but all of that sounds great. But
I'm
with all,
always waiting for that interesting call. Between all the famous people I've worked with and the greats, there's been hundreds of people I've played on their albums. I either was acting as an inspiration or as a mentor or just a very good pianist to help uplift their music. So I've been doing that since the internet came about. In my studio right here, I've done 400 tracks in the last 20 years for people just because they send me the tracks. They didn't have the money to bring me to a studio in Russia or Finland or England. I just do them in my studio. And it sounds like we were together because I'm very trained at working with a click track and all the normal things that a studio musician can do. But I'm not a typical studio musician. And Mick Ronson warned me. He said, don't just be a studio musician, pick the special ones you want, but they'll turn you into white toast if you're cranking it out every day. And he
well,
was right.
when obviously you like, despite all the turnover that there would be in the Bowie bands, as we've established, you stayed through so many different eras and different moments. So it's probably you don't have to pick just one because I don't think it's such a loaded question, but what are some of your favorite work that you've done with him? Songs, albums, eras. Maybe some people would probably assume it's Aladdin Sane, the famous piano part from that. But when you look back at, as you said so poignantly, David Bowie said, we had a great body of work, which is the understatement of all time. And yeah, when you look back on that body of work, what stands out to you? Either because you just think it's really great, or it could be for a personal reason, like a memory of recording or playing it. What stands out
I,
to you?
I follow your question. I'll go from very famous pieces to very obscure pieces. How's that?
Sounds great.
Aladdin Sane, Lady Grinning Soul, Time, Sweet Thing Candidate, Young Americans, Can You Hear Me, Shadow Man, Bring Me the Disco King, Loneliest Guy, Strangers When We Meet, The Motel. Um, those are the ones that came immediately to mind.
That's a fairly substantial list, but why did those come to mind with, so quickly?
because I played great on them.
I love that answer. Like you felt like you were really in the zone when you were doing those.
You know, I was in the zone, and you're either in the zone or the flow or you're not. And there are many times I've not been in the zone when I've made music, but that's the times I would ask anybody who was nearby to shoot me. But for the most part, when I sit at that piano and just relax and get out of my own way, because I've done so much preparation my whole life, I've probably played the piano way over 100,000 hours.
Well,
So it's sort of all in the cellular memory, and I just sit and, and it just comes out. I don't know where that came from. It could have just as well been this, whatever. In other words, I'm just feeling the groove, the pulse, the romanticism, and I feel blessed to have that gift, but I also paid my dues.
well, you mentioned with outside how a lot of that was improv, and I mean that's kind of your bread and butter, right? Is it true that you improvise and kind of literally never play live anything the same way
That's still
twice?
true. Even life on Mars, uh, you know, I mean, I never played it that way. So I've played it live with him 200 times. Every time was different. Enough that I could get him in the right key and ended right, but whatever happened in the middle always was different. And he was good with that. So I was the loose cannon in all the bands I work with, maybe 12 or 13 bands. I was the loose cannon over the 40-year span. But if everybody else was playing that loose, it would have been a fucking nightmare. So I was sitting on the shoulders of these guys who were just great. Mick Ronson, Carlos Alomar, Earl Slick, these guys were locking it down. And they could play those parts the same every night. If I had to do that, I would really ask you to shoot me. That's not who I am. I mean, I had my fair of Broadway shows and all that. I could do that if I'm paid enough money, but there's no amount of money these days that makes me want to do the same thing over and over because I try to play how I feel in the moment.
The I mentioned Aladdin Sane, of course, and that's like you're
Well, that's
singing.
the only one anyone ever calls me on or talks about. I've had an email on that for the last 30 years since the incident every day, and
Really?
not any other song.
Why do you, I mean, maybe it's a silly question, but obviously it's iconic, but why do you think that that's the one that like you're so iconically associated with?
I don't have a fucking clue.
Really?
No. What do you think?
Um, I honestly, I mean, that's why I asked. It was from a place of real genuine curiosity. I mean, obviously it's when you hear it, you know it right away, and it was from an era of David Bowie that's like, I mean, he had so many important eras, but I think it's an era like just even the album art and stuff, is something that's kind of like drilled
Yeah.
into people's
Well,
brains.
it's 53 years since I did that.
Wow, wow.
And what I can say, which takes it out of my Garson zone, there's a word called zeitgeist. I don't remember what it means. But I think something to do with the vibe of what's going on in the culture at any given time. The Beatles had their moment in that period of time. Dylan, Bowie with the Ziggy stuff, because people don't talk about other parts of his life. It's always about Ziggy and all of that. So Aladdin Sane was coming out of the Ziggy Stardust album. It was in the air. I could not play a wrong note. It was just inevitable. And what happened was undeniable. And the fact that he gave me permission to do whatever the fuck I wanted and play such a bizarre piano solo that had classical, jazz, rock, a million crazy notes, that was never done. If I did that today, it would be still ahead of its time. And this was 53 years ago, so it was land breaking. And probably as a rock solo, it's probably the most advanced rock solo ever played.
Well, there
but
you
I
go.
didn't. So maybe those are the closest reasons I could give you.
He literally, I mean, I don't know how many takes you did or how many, like, did he literally, is that a one take thing? Did he just put you in studio and said, hey, go for it?
The Aladdin Sane track that you know was one take. Prior to that, I had no idea he wanted something that out there. So he said, play something, and I played a blues type solo, and he said that's too commonplace. And then I played Aladdin solo, and he said that's still too normal. Do something way out there. And that's when I took the liberty, and it was one take. You're absolutely right.
What a dream boss. What a dream gig to have.
Dream boss is the word. Do you know nobody has given me the space? This could almost make me cry because there's nobody who's given me the space to be me more than him. I've been micromanaged to my death, and I hate it. And I don't accept those things anymore. People, they should hire me to be me, not what they think they want. And I've had some horrible experiences. And guess what? I can do it, but I don't enjoy it, and I won't anymore. But I've done things where people put me in a box and it felt just painful.
And do you know if Bowie, I mean, you've talked about how you would sort of be the quote unquote loose cannon, but there's obviously so many amazing musicians that he's worked with over, that he worked with during his body of work. And one of them, Carmine Rojas, who I am friendly with, is a great guy. He'll be at the Sunrose with you. But, um, well, it's sort of a two-part question. It's this, do you all feel like you're sort of a special club? But I'm curious if when Bowie worked with his other musicians like Carmine and other people over the years, Earl Slick, Reeves, whoever, did he give them that same freedom, like, hey, go for it? Or did he manage them? Not maybe not micromanage them, but did he give them a little bit more like direction? Did you get
I,
like,
I see what you're saying. I honestly believe that he gave everybody permission to be themselves. They maybe weren't as wild in their construction of the solos and the parts, but he loved disparaging things. There's Carlos Alomar is one of the greatest funk guitar players in a groove and rhythm, and then you got Earl Slick on the other side of the stage, this guy from Staten Island who's playing some crazy rock solo against a groove. David didn't mind that. He that's what was so big about him. He could handle two different viewpoints simultaneously. Most people,
mm,
it has to be this way or that way. It has to be country, it has to be pop, it has to be rock. Many artists these days obviously are spreading their wings. Sly was like that. He had all kinds of people in his band and that played all kinds of music, and he produced a lot of things that were not just black soul music. It was all over the place. So he had that ability. Um, Certainly, the Beatles, when they were moving around with their music, it went from, you know, a simple song like "I Want to Hold Your Hand" to like, some very deep music. Uh, so they had it. Um, Dylan has done it with lyrics for his whole life. U2 has shifted a lot. Um, Miles Davis in jazz is the closest I could come to make the analogy with Bowie.
one analogy, and it's kind of ironic that I'm just thinking about this and bringing it up in literally real time, just chatting with you because Prince died only a few months after Bowie did. We're coming up on a decade of that. But much like Prince, David Bowie was someone who, when he picked his collaborators to be in the studio with him, for his different bands, he launched so many careers or relaunched, like even bringing on Peter Frampton at a time when Peter Frampton was, kind of in a lull in his career. But, when I think of like Stevie Ray Vaughan, think of you, I think of Earl Slick, I think of Reeves, I think of, I mean, the list goes on. It's too long a list. But like when I think of those people, I mean, not saying they didn't have careers before, particularly with Peter Frampton, as I mentioned, but like their career, their lives changed because David Bowie gave them a chance, and they'll forever have that, that feather in their cap that they
It's totally
are
true. What
and
you
Prince
did,
was the same way with a lot of the people he worked with.
Prince was the same way. Bowie, more than anyone. You know who was when I was the music director for the Young Americans tour, which was a tour that went from California back to the East Coast because the Diamond Dogs tour was so expensive and the set was so expensive, we ran out of money. But Luther Vandross was in my band.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the,
crazy.
I mean, that's the biggest when you talk to people in the 80s who love that guy and that voice. And if you ever listen to House Is Not a Home, the Burt Bacharach song that Luther did, it's just as good as anything you've ever heard vocally. And here, it's the Mike Garson band opening up for David Bowie in 1974. And we're opening up with Luther singing and me playing piano with a 10-piece band doing funk music.
That's amazing. On this,
Nobody knows about any of that because the manager at the time was a prick and he never promoted me. It was all about David, which I understood from that viewpoint, but he realized after I had something to offer, but then he wanted to manage me after as well as other people. He wanted the same thing he was taking from David Bowie, which was 50%, and that's a ripoff.
who was
So
that? Was that
that was
DeFreeze?
Tony DeFries,
Oh,
and
okay.
and Bowie eventually disengaged from him. So
50%. Jesus
that's a
Christ.
lot of money. So
Yeah.
I'm
Wow.
sure it was justified in his head. I got along with Tony, but it's just that, you know, artists do get taken advantage of, and that's a terrible thing. And Bowie suffered for years. He was bankrupt because of things like that.
Hmm.
And I mean, my life has been a roller coaster that way. And I've had my first manager when I was 14 and a half, 15 in a band. We were supposed to get $40 for the whole band. We played a gig, and the manager took out a gun that and didn't pay us.
Holy cow.
That's how I entered the business.
And it didn't deter you, which might have deterred some people.
Elton has a song, I'm Still Standing, and I'm older than him.
You mentioned opening for Bowie, like as yourself. Didn't you, going back to the Ziggy Stardust tour, didn't weren't you like his opening act, just like kind of warming up the crowd with some piano
Well,
stuff?
on that very big Hammersmith gig,
Okay.
out of nowhere, he was nervous and he said, "Open up the show, play a medley of my songs your way." And meanwhile, Streisand's in the audience and Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney and Elliot Gould. I mean, it just went on and on. And I'm opening the show.
Wow. I guess he knew he could throw you into any any situation,
The
right?
only thing I remember was that he said to me, "I was more nervous for you than for myself."
Were you nervous?
Yeah,
I suppose you didn't let him see you sweat though through your
no,
tuxedo.
no, I'm a professional, but he feels it.
Yeah.
But he said I was more nervous for you than for myself. That's the point of where that guy has humanity and a lot of love. People don't know that side of him.
Well,
He was very warm and very loving, aside from being a genius. He was one of the good guys. Yeah, I'm sure he had his problems like we all have, but underneath it all, he was pretty special. That's why
yeah.
I'm doing this thing at the Sunrose.
Absolutely. I want to
I could be on the road doing this. I just wanted to do it locally in a small club for those who really love him. And probably they'll film it or whatever. But the point of the matter is, I've asked people to do it every night. It's different artists, some are the same. I asked people like Jake Wesley Rogers, who's terrific, Billy Corgan, obviously. Jimmy Chamberlain's going to jump up on drums. Chad Smith's going to jump up on drums. This is Saturday. Other nights, I have a great singer on Thursday night named Debbie Holiday. She's fantastic. I have Judith Hill Friday and Saturday, who's amazing. I think I have Andrew Day on Friday night. These people love David, and I'm looking forward to these three shows. Again, I don't know what I'll play, but I'll play
Oh,
something that's fitting at that moment.
just play the set list is when I asked you what are the songs that stood out to you and you just like rattled off, those songs, some which
I could and
those.
would do that, except my band would have a heart attack. So I have to have it a little more organized. But for sure, you'll hear Heroes and Let's Dance and Fame. I'm going to do a lot of the hits, a couple unknown ones, but mostly the ones that I love and that I thought this audience would love. You got to understand, it's another generation now that has already come up. And I'm
Hmm.
bringing some young kids from USC, and my grandson Max Garson. He's going to play some drums on some songs. And I'm using Andrew Day's rhythm section, Dave Wood, Nando Real, and Shay Godwin. These are great musicians. Plus, Rusty Anderson is going to pop up
Oh,
on Thursday night from obviously been with Paul McCartney for 24 years. So it's like I don't know who and what will show up, but I need to be organized enough in my head that it doesn't become like some insane experiment.
so Thursday night, who are the guests on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday so far?
Well, on Thursday, I think we have Rusty and Debbie Holiday and Jake Wesley Rogers. He'll do all 3 nights, and some of these young, talented kids from USC. And Friday would be Andrew Day and Judith Hill. Luke Spiller will be with us Friday and Saturday night, and Billy Corgan will drop in Saturday night. Chad Smith will play a couple of tunes Saturday night on drums, and Jimmy Chamberlain will play a few tunes on drums. So it's going to be different every night and special every night. And a lot of people bought the 3 day pass, so they'll see how it evolves.
And
And
the um
at the Sunrose.
what is the process of and you've had to deal with this process before when you've done other Bowie All-Star tributes, whether they were live or live streamed. uh the process of figuring out who sings what. I imagine there are some people that are like volunteering, like I want to do this, or if they're looking at a possible list of songs, or like I volunteer to do that one. But maybe there's a little bit of not conflict, but there's more than one person. Divvying up a bunch of songs like that is probably a
And
bit daunting.
it's daunting, and it's not actually worked out yet.
Okay, I'll just have to
That's
show
what's
up.
that's what is actually scary because I don't know. Knowing me, I'll just if there's two want to sing a song, I'll have them both sing it. I'll
I
make a
mean,
duet out of it.
I do want to ask, we talked a bit about Outside, and we've talked about real and the trilogy that was supposed to be. We talked about Reality. We've mentioned Trent Reznor. I believe you were instrumental in helping them come together, and you've worked with Trent outside of the Bowie world. But I'm curious about what your thought is on Bowie's, for lack of a better era, like the '90s techno stuff or electronica stuff. He jumped right on board with that when that was burgeoning, and my memory of it was that it was somewhat mixed in how it was received. Like there were some people who were like, "Hell yeah, Bowie's with the times and at the forefront and touring with Moby and doing all this cool, touring with Trent Reznor, doing all this cool stuff." But then I think there might have been some more rockist purist types who didn't quite get it. And when you look back, and I think some of that stuff is still to this day a bit underrated, when people look back at his body of work. And you were right there,
Well, I'm playing on the Earthling album, which was a lot of drum and bass for the mid '90s. But he took the drum and bass concept and he still sang beautiful melodies on the top. That's the difference. Dead Man Walking is a fantastic song. Battle for Britain, genius. So the fact that the people haven't caught up with him, the classical composer Sebastian Bach, his music wasn't discovered till 150 years after he died by another composer named Mendelssohn. So David's ahead of that. They have discovered some of his music, but people don't have a clue how good Outside is and how good Next Day is and how good Black Star is and how good even Hours, which is not the best produced album, but the songs on there, Seven and songs like that, were just beautiful. And albums that I didn't work on, like Hunky Dory, those songs were amazing. and the
Why were
Bewley,
there? I'm sorry to
the
interrupt, but
Bewley,
go
yeah,
ahead. No, I mean, you
The
just,
Bewley Brothers. I was saying is a great song. Nobody knows that.
I was just
Going to
curious.
Dublin and doing bigger festivals, by the way, the month after. But this is the one that's very close to my heart right now.
You mentioned you weren't on Hunky Dory, and yeah, there were times when you weren't working with Bowie. Why did, you ended up still being his longest running band member, but what were the reasons why? I mean, was it a situation where you weren't available, or was it a situation where Bowie was like, for this particular album I'm making, like your vibe is, not the right fit. Like, why would
I
you
think
take those dips?
it's a great question. I think there were times that I was not available, but more often, who was the right guy for that project? That's where his genius was. He was a casting director. Okay, I laid out this avant-garde jazz in 1973 on Aladdin Sane, for example. Then Donnie McClassen on saxophone and Mark Juliana and Tim LaFay playing for him and Jason Linda playing for him on Black Star. Fantastic jazz musicians and rock musicians doing it 30, 40 years, taking the next level after me. So I made it safe. I gave permission for David to stretch out, go do Scary Monsters and Heroes and all those experimental things that he did with Brian Eno. It was like if I have the balls to play such a wild solo on Aladdin, saying he can do the same thing for the rest of his career, because I was respected because I was a New York jazz musician with classical background. Bowie loved jazz and he loved classical, and we shared that. That's what brought us together. So if I'm giving permission, it's the same way he gave permission for the LGBT community to be who they are. He gave permission for the punk people to be who they are.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so um, he gave permission for jazz guys like me and blues guys to express themselves. And that's an extraordinary talent and gift. So he is the ultimate casting director. That's the right word.
It's a good way of putting it. What do you think is, we were sort of talking about the 90s stuff, the electronic stuff and how it was received at the time. What do you think is his most underrated stuff, his most underrated album? It could be one you worked on or not, but like, there's such a huge body of work there. What do you think is the one that needs that
I
people who
think
maybe
the one that's really, really great is Outside. Really, really good.
and any reasons why that was the one that popped into your head? You answered that with very little hesitation.
Yeah, he said to me a year or two before we made the album, I feel like I sold out in the 80s.
Hmm.
That's what he said to me. And I need to, it's not totally true because Loving the Alien was great and there's some wonderful songs, but I think what happened is after Let's Dance and Modern Love, they wanted more and more of that, meaning the record companies, because that made money for them. So he fell into that trap, and I think he felt, because he's a very honest guy, had a lot of integrity, he felt he compromised his truth. Mike, what we're going to do, I'm going to choose the people who had the biggest influence on my life in the last 30 years, and we're going to go into the studio, at Mountain Studio in Geneva, Switzerland, right by the Montreux Festival. And we're going to improvise for a few weeks, and then Brian Eno and myself are going to tie it together and make an album of it and have wild interludes and all this stuff. So it was so sincere, the album. I mean,
Mm.
I went in every day for 3, 4 hours and just sat at the piano in a way, leading the band, just improvising anything that came to my mind, and everybody in their own way joined in. It's not that way for every song. Everyone had a great contribution, but being the most advanced musician of the band, they defaulted to me. That's why David hired me. But then you get the genius of a Brian Eno who brings something else there. and Reeves is a wild character, and Sterling on drums, you know. So the whole was greater than the sum of the part. But for sure, my role was significant.
Yeah, I think that's well established. I mean, will you do anything from outside at the Sunrose? Is that too far a stretch? Will you, if you have such a,
I would love to, but I already sent them the 19 possibilities, and that
okay,
wasn't one of them.
okay,
I have done it. You know, you got to understand, since he passed, I did at least 100 concerts with at least 100 different singers, from Sting to Lord to Boy George to Adam Lambert, everyone who you could think of. So I'm blessed that way because they all love Bowie.
yeah,
And because I'm attached to him musically and I'm good by myself. I was good before I met Bowie, just to make the story clearer. He wouldn't have hired me
no,
if
no, I think
I didn't play good before I got the gig. I wouldn't have got the gig. So I was,
obviously, yeah.
and then if I never got that gig, I still would be great. I just would be not known.
Were you on the reality tour, by the way? Because that was his
Oh
last.
yeah, of
Did you play the
course.
Wiltern? I was at the Wiltern show, one of them.
I didn't physically see you there, but I was there.
I was there. That's okay. There
I
were a
did
lot,
that. Yes, that was a great tour, you know.
and that was for people listening to this who don't know the Wiltern, which is in Los Angeles. It's a club basically. It's like I don't know, few thousand, couple thousand.
2,000 people. I worked there with Sting when I did some
Yes.
of the alumni stuff. I think you might have been there.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that. That was very shortly after David Bowie passed, and Sting, along with Joe Elliott and Gavin Rossdale, and I forget who else, but it was an
Simon Le Bon,
amazing night, and no one knew who what was doing. And of course, Sting did. I believe he did Black Star.
Black Star and Lazarus
Yeah,
was actually the most memorable thing I recall from the 100 singers that I work with.
yeah. I mean that blew everyone's mind. And so yes, but to go back to it was also emotional for a lot of people in LA, I imagine, because the last time David Bowie played Los Angeles was there. He did like a short residency at this pretty small venue for someone of his stature. And but the reality tour, not to get into too much bummer stuff, but that was the end of his touring career.
Yeah, we did 113 shows. And then in Germany, he had a heart attack. So the last 6, 10, 15 shows in Europe, which were big arenas, 80,000 people type stuff, never happened. And there was
Mhm.
never touring after that.
And I don't know if anyone at that time realized that that was that, I assume everyone, like you mentioned, that he a few years later was in 2006 was saying he wanted to come back and give it another go.
But you
So,
know what? He called me one day around 2005 and he said, "Do you think we should go back on tour, Mike?" And I was stupid in terms of my own career and selfishness. I should have said, "Yeah," because I want to go out and make a living and I love playing with you. But I didn't go there. You know what I said?
huh.
I said, "Only if you feel it." And guess what? He didn't feel it.
No, that was the right answer. I mean,
It certainly had a lot of integrity. It screwed me up financially, and just more importantly, the joy of being on the road and playing with him.
yeah.
But he was done. He was done touring.
What do you think? Obviously, we've talked about 2 days before his death, on his birthday, almost exactly 10 years ago, he released Black Star, an album that a lot of people did not expect would be as great as it was. And people didn't know what to expect, but it was an amazing way to, as we soon found out, way to end his run. And a lot of people hold that in high regard. I know you didn't play on that one, I don't believe, but you certainly must have enjoyed it. Or did you play on
I,
it?
no, I enjoyed it, and I would have loved to play on it. And had I been in New York, because he wanted me to move to New York, but I had my whole family here, so I
Mm,
couldn't do that. He used everyone from New York, and he didn't like LA because he had some bad experiences here due
mm.
to drugs in the late 70s. So he did not like the fact that I lived here. Not that I lived in Hollywood. I'm just tucked away somewhere. So, but had I violated my integrity and moved to New York and left my family, that didn't feel right at all. So I wasn't on it. But I know what I would have played on it, and I've done Lazarus, and I'm doing it with Jake Wesley Rogers next week, 3 nights, and it'll be different each night. And I don't even know what I'm going to play, but I love that song. But I'm not going to do it exactly like the album.
Well, what I was, yeah, I mean, obviously you would have been a great fit for Black Star because it was such a jazz, like his jazziest record, you could say. But in terms of, he was still at the very end of his career after taking a break from recording or records for over a decade. He was still pushing himself and doing things that people didn't expect. And he was seemingly on an upswing creatively. Like, what do you think, had he lived, if he was still making records now in 2026, what kind of music, what do you think he'd be doing now? What kind of genres or would he be exploring? Because he was always searching, right?
It would have been fascinating to see how we continue to evolve. I know I would have been with him and I would have been doing all that touring and all the other albums, but to foretell what we would have done wouldn't be in it. But the insight I can give you is in 2004, he said to me, or 2003, if I had to do it all over, Mike, I would do it more community like.
Hmm.
And if you think about Taylor Swift, how she does that tour, everyone's singing every word, everyone has bracelets. It's more than songs and a singer and a great band. It's a community. If you watch Ed Sheeran, if you watch a lot of these younger talents, the audience is more included. Whereas David, we come from a different generation where you're the great artist and there's this audience and there's a distance. Now these artists are removing that. Have you noticed that?
I have, and I see it both ways. Like, we have social media and stuff, and ironically, David Bowie was at the absolute forefront of the internet with Bowie Net. So it would have been really interesting to see how he would have embraced that. All in Instagram, TikTok, live
Oh, he would
streams.
have embraced it because he called me in the 90s and I wanted to talk music and all he talked to me is about the internet and it was barely formed.
Yeah, I mean, he was, if not the first, then one of the first artists to have a whole, not, it wasn't just a website, it was a whole infrastructure, it was a whole thing. So
And more was in his head and he foresaw what was going to happen. I mean, he was like a true visionary. He
hmm
would be our modern version of um he'd be our modern version of Michelangelo, Da Vinci, people like that, because he was multifaceted. He was a great artist, painter, sculptor, actor. His acting was unreal.
hmm
He could have made it in Hollywood and won Oscars. He preferred the music, but he was an editor of an art magazine.
I mean, the reason I was about to say I would have mixed feelings about it, because even though he was very much at the forefront of the internet, when you were talking about the community and kind of having little less of a wall between the artist and the fandom. So I would have been interested to see how he would have embraced social media and stuff to be in touch with fans. But at the same time, sometimes I think the artists are a little too accessible. Sometimes I do long for the days where it wasn't artists being like, here's live stream of this, here's my face, here's like here's pictures of the food I just ate, or here I am in my backyard. Like David Bowie, for much of his career, even going away and then suddenly dropping the next day out of nowhere, he was he definitely had that wall up, that in a good way. Like, he had, sometimes I miss a bit of that mystique that, our rock stars aren't supposed to be like us. They are supposed to be aliens, and we don't know that much about them except what they curate. And
The
you
point
know,
is, it's a good point, very good point. How he would have maneuvered that and managed it, I don't know. And you're right. Now it's like a free for all. Anyone could put anything up, and it's like throwing spaghetti on the wall. Some things will stick, some things won't. And Look, I grew up with classical music and jazz. We were on stage and people were respectful and maybe they would ask for an autograph nicely, especially in jazz and classical. It wasn't like the fandom that you get from rock. And I would have liked to see how he would have handled that. Your point is valid because knowing him, it's just a simple word to see make it community like and you think it's kumbaya, but he would have done something different with it.
Yeah. I also would be curious, I made the reference to the fact that been this ongoing joke or meme about how the world went to shit when David Bowie died. It was beginning of 2016 and it's kind of the beginning of a crazy era in the world after that. Not that there wasn't craziness before, of course, but I am wondering how you feel you would have responded to just all of the stuff that has happened politically and just socially in the past 10 years. If it's something he would have addressed in his music or,
He stayed away from politics in
yeah,
a way,
mostly, yeah.
but he had his viewpoints. I think that might be why he left.
He was like, all right, beam me up.
Oh, bye bye. This is above my pay grade. That fucked up. I'm out of here.
I
It's
mean, can you blame the guy
I
sometimes,
can't.
right?
You can't blame the guy. And it's funny you mentioned that about he left and things went to shit. It it was something I was thinking about saying each night at the show towards the end, but I don't want to turn him into a fucking prophet or Jesus Christ. He's David,
Mm.
but his impact was powerful. So I'll figure out how to say that doesn't make him some fucking guru or bullshit cult, because you don't want that. He was David. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to come to grips with what to say if I say anything. But that thought and the way you expressed it was my initial thing I was going to say. Oh, the fucking place went to shit since he left.
It's been ongoing because, not to get too into politics, but like 2016 was a crazy year. It was crazy politically in this country. There was Trump overseas, there was Brexit, and then a whole bunch of other celebrities died in that crazy year, like I mentioned, Prince and George Michael and whatever. It just was a weird year, and it's been a weird year ever since. So, again, it's been a decade, and not to end things on a bummer note like that, it's in some ways the decade has felt very long, but in other ways, again, as I said at the top of this interview, it's hard to believe that it has been a whole decade, and that's going to be a lot to kind of sum up or cover in your Sunburst show. So, as I leave you and ask, I'm very much looking forward to the shows. I'll be at least at one of them, and I'll see you there. But like, what's
Which one
kind
are
of your
you? Which one are you coming to?
well, judging on what you're saying of the lineup, I definitely want to be at the Saturday one, but I may come to the Friday one as well. But in general, when you look at each show is going to be a little different in terms of the set list and, of course, the guests. But
And even the ones who are singing the same songs, it's the old story. I don't play them the same every night.
exactly,
So it'll be a twist.
but in general, as you're curating this residency and you're taking stock of the body of work that David Bowie emailed you about and your life and David Bowie's legacy and what he meant to he means something different to everyone because he had so many different eras and guises. But like, what's kind of your overall approach or agenda in terms of what kind of message or impact are you trying to have if someone was to go to all three, I guess?
Let's put it this way. This will be my 47th show at Sunrose, and I
Wow.
have 10 more after these three throughout the year with various artists. And and all I could say is I'm going to try to practice what I preach. I'm still human and I fuck up, but I'm going to try to get out of my own way and let it just be what it's supposed to be, and I don't know what that is. It's not going to be the feel of a tribute band just playing Bowie songs. It's going to have heart. This guy means a lot to me. He changed the whole trajectory of my life. And it's still, since he died, on the opposite side of the coin of what you were saying, my career has keep going up and getting better and better. And I'm 80.
Which I'm
Like the
so happy to
first
hear that.
70, Yes, and it feels like the first 79 was an internship. And
I love that.
now the game begins, because I'm less fucked up now. Because who lives that long and still loves playing?
No, it's amazing. Like I said, the joy that you've discussed. Do you feel a obligation, and this might be shared by some of the many other illustrious players in David Bowie's universe, but do you feel now that he's gone and we don't know what he would have been doing, he probably wouldn't have been playing live, but he probably still would have been making amazing, impactful music. Do you feel an obligation or responsibility to uphold the legacy, especially in terms of educating younger people, new fans who, are maybe only discovering Bowie now? Like, do you feel like it's kind of your duty to keep that flame lit?
Actually, no.
Oh,
What I feel is that people always ask me, can you do something? Because it's brings back memories for them. So the reason I did all those 100 concerts around the world in the early days after he passed was to fulfill that vacuum. Now it's 10 years. I happen to love playing his music, and that's the only reason I do it. But for every Bowie show that I do, nobody knows about everything else I do in between jazz concerts and master classes around the world and Zoom lessons. But that's the thing that, of course, I'm known for because that has the most gravitas, let's say. It's David Bowie. I, I played with Martha Reeves for Martha and the Vandellas. I played for Mel Torme. I turned down Sarah Vaughan. I turned down Frank Sinatra. I worked with Stanley Clarke. I played with some of the greatest musicians ever. No one talks about that. And because people only have the bandwidth to talk about the thing that had the most impact on them. So they'll talk about Dylan or the Beatles or John or Imagine or whoever that latest great artist is, the Eras tour with Taylor Swift. And in my case, it's the legacy with Bowie. But I don't feel an obligation because David wants me to be me. I'll even do some songs these next 3 days that won't be David Bowie songs
mm.
because he would insist on that if he was here. He did some covers when we were on the road. I in 19 to a bar and grill with David after some show, like in November or October of '72. He says, "Go up to the piano." I said, "Why?" He says, "I want to sing My Funny Valentine," which is a song that goes. This is what he got a kick out of
Wow.
at 1 in the morning with Mike Garson. Nobody knows that. I don't think
Was anyone there? Was it like I
probably
can
seven drunks.
but like did they realize this? I mean, holy cow, like David
No,
Bowie's just like singing it. Oh my God.
he,
Wow.
you got to understand, it was his first tour. He was not known
Yeah.
here, so it looked like some queer guy coming on stage. Get him the fuck out of here.
Well, if they'd only known what
If
was
they
going to
only
happen. So
knew. If they
hindsight's
only knew.
so they could say they were there, but I'm gonna be able to say I was at Sunrose, and I'm very excited about that, and I always have a great time there. Even, I've been to, the things you've done with Luke Spiller, or just your jazz nights where you have Judith Hill or other people coming up. You never really know what to expect, except that you're gonna have a good time.
Somebody
So,
reminded me that right before Chapel Rowan made it, she came up and sang Heroes.
is there video of that? I gotta go find that.
Ask Sharon.
I will
She,
find it.
there's probably a little clip. But I mean, it's crazy, who has shown up. Some
Yeah.
people from some of these Disney shows have shown up, who in these movies, where they're the voice of something.
Hmm.
It's a safe space. That's why I like it. Separate from the fact that I'm home in 20 minutes,
That's always a plus.
that's a nice plus after being a road rat for like 60 years, right?
Yeah, well, even though maybe you stay closer to home more often these days, the joy, it's so nice that your 79 year internship worked out and you still have the joy. It's nice to behold that you do this for the
Well,
love of it.
here's the thing that's crazy. Uh, Sharon, who's the promoter and a wonderful girl who masterminded this, she wanted to do a show when I turned 80. And I was just felt I didn't feel like playing. I wanted to be with my wife and just take a little vacation, which I did. But she didn't feel settled about that. So she promoted this as 10 years of David passing and my 80th year of revolutions around the sun. And that's what attracted Billy Corgan to doing the gig. More to celebrate my birthday. Not that he didn't love Bowie, he did. I used to play Space Oddity when I worked with the Pumpkins, you know. But he's doing it out of friendship and love and respect to me, and that's very touching to me.
And similar to the relationship you had with your dream boss, at the end of the day, it was all about, these connections.
Isn't that all you're left with? You don't really go to your grave with your money, do you?
But you go, well, let's not talk about graves because don't want to end that on, you but no, it's like it's really nice how you bring people to, David Bowie brought a lot of people together and, in his time, all these wonderful musicians and collaborators that he worked with and producers and fans, all the people he brought together as fans and still continues to after he's gone. And you do that too. You're a great connector bringing
And that's
all
why
these
I'm
different people
bringing a
together.
lot of younger folks to sing some songs. We only talked about the names, and because that's paying it back to this next generation after. So I mean that's it's not an obligation. It's naturally what anyone who's has half a brain would do. You pay it forward. I mean, I, I've had the gift of being at Madison Square Garden 10 times in Hollywood Bowl. I still will do those things again, but I'm loving seeing others grab the mantle and move forward with it while I still hold on to it as me. I'm not giving up and turning it over to them. I'm just extending it so others can also be part of it. But like I said, I'm just beginning, so I'm not leaving. I'm just including others in it. That's the community aspect. I've inherited that from David. I'm
Well,
not I'm not jumping on the stage and doing a sing along, but I am including whoever is there in my radar or aura. What can I say?
Well, I'm very excited to see what happens if you still have that tuxedo from whatever store that was on Sunset and the boots.
I
Dust them
will.
off.
I have a few outfits somewhere, and you might get a kick.
I cannot wait to check that out and also check out the set list and all the guests. I mean, my mind boggles with all the possibilities, as I'm sure yours does too. I'm sure your mind is boggling
I
right
mean,
now.
my biggest thing is so many moving parts,
Hmm.
and I've been doing this all without my management company because my son-in-law, and he's finishing law school and he's taking his bar, so I have no help. So I've been doing it all myself.
I know you're going to figure it out though. You always do.
Thank you.
I mean, you're the king of figuring things out on the fly, right? You're the improv king, so I
At
know
least
it's going to
that,
be great.
at least that's what I said before, but you never could believe what I say. I'm full of shit. Yeah.
All right, then I'll just disregard this whole interview we did. I'm just kidding.
Rip it up. It's just between you and I
No,
having
no,
a good
no.
hangout.
Nah, people need to listen to this one. Well, I did have a good time hanging out with you, but people need to live vicariously through us and take a listen because you always are so wonderful to chat with. And I look forward to seeing you at the Sunrose in person. We'll chat then. But in the meantime, good luck with all your preparation. And thanks again for sharing all the stories. This is, some of them very poignant stories. David Bowie is much missed, but, through people like you and your collaborators, he's still with us.
Well, I'll say goodbye and I won't talk about the grave. Good night.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been a real treat, as it always is.
Bye bye.